This is a recording of a webinar we did in July of 2019 as an introduction to worker cooperatives. We did the introduction as a comparison between worker cooperatives and other forms of cooperatives. So here we go. Hello. Thank you for coming to this first introduction to worker cooperatives. Tonight we're just going through some very basic things about cooperatives. There are three different kinds of cooperatives. Number one, there's the consumer cooperative. Number two, there's the producer cooperative. And thirdly, there is the worker-owned cooperative. The cooperative movement started in the 1840s in England. 1840s in England was during the Industrial Revolution, where a lot of people moved from the country to cities to work in factories. During the Industrial Revolution, there were many abuses. The hours were long, the work was hard, and the pay was low, and many just did not find the improvement in their lives they were looking for by moving from the country to the city. So in Rochdale, England in 1844, a group of people got together and formed the first cooperative. The reason why this cooperative is so significant is that other people had tried to do this before, but they all failed. What made this one different is that they came up with the 7 cooperative principles that many cooperatives still use as their foundation to this day. In this particular city were some textile workers. They worked in the textile mill, and the pay was low, and where they could buy groceries would be in a company-owned grocery store. And so in other words, the company paid them to work, and then they had to pay the money right back again to get groceries, so they were really not getting anything. So they decided that they could start their own grocery store, and they did. They got together 23 pounds, possibly a very large amount of money in those days, and bought some bread, milk, eggs, and sold these groceries in their own grocery store, so that the factory owner could no longer make a profit on their groceries as well. And the next step they did was to buy a loom so they could weave their own clothes and basically be in competition with the factory owner. That was the first worker cooperative and the first consumer cooperative that we know of. As I said, the reason this one is significant is because they came up with the 7 principles that we still use today for other cooperatives. And another reason why this is significant is that this was really people who had their backs against the wall, people who were in distress, people who had problems, who found a way to lift themselves out of them. So in other words, there were no politicians, no benefactors, nobody who did it for them. They did it for themselves. And we see something similar going on about 100 years later in Spain. After the Second World War, and Spain was also involved in a brutal civil war after the Second World War. So Spain was pretty much a mess at that time. Nobody had jobs, and it was very difficult to make a living. So there was a Catholic priest in a town called Mondragon in the northwestern part of Spain, at the border of France. He was running a small technical college, and the students there decided they wanted to produce, I don't know exactly what they produced, but they produced some kind of kitchen appliance, which they sold and to make ends meet for themselves. And others in the region saw that this was a way for them to earn money, to live. And the idea took hold with other people. So yeah, and after a few years, enough people had gotten together that they could form their own bank. So everybody who had money would deposit their money into their bank, and they would use the money to start other cooperatives. And that's when the cooperative movement in the Mondragon region of Spain really expanded seriously. Another milestone we can think of is September 11, 2001 in New York City. The World Trade Center came down, and with it came down a restaurant at the top of it, of one of them. And when the owner of the restaurant found a new place, the workers expected to be hired back again, but they didn't. So they decided that they could raise money to start their own restaurant. So they did. It's called Colors. It's still there today, but it is no longer a worker cooperative. It is a teaching restaurant where people can learn how to become bartenders and hostesses and so on. So in all these three cases, it was always people who were in distress, who found a way to improve their lives with cooperatives. Today we have three, as I mentioned, three different kinds of cooperatives. There aren't a lot, so people aren't usually familiar with it. And even if they are familiar with cooperatives, we should know they often are in touch with cooperatives in one way or another. They just don't know it. For example, most people do not realize that credit unions are cooperatives. For most consumers, credit unions are just like any other bank. It's a place where you deposit money and you can withdraw money, and you can make loans, and do all kinds of banking transactions with the cooperative. What they don't know is how these cooperatives, these credit unions are owned. If you look at a regular bank, like Citibank, Chase, and others, these banks are owned by shareholders, and then they exist to produce dividends or income for the shareholders. Credit unions do not have shareholders. They are basically owned by themselves, or they are owned by members. to become a member of a credit union, the fee to join is usually either $1 or $5. So the first $5 of your deposit will then be your membership fee. And you, with that membership fee, you earn the right to vote for the leadership of the credit union. And number two, if the credit union makes a profit, it will be distributed to its members. Typically, credit unions do not make a profit. They devise their operation so that the expenses and the income will be zero. So in other words, the members benefit by getting free checking. They get lower rates on their loans and get higher rates on their deposits. So that's how credit unions function. So in other words, nobody takes a portion of the earnings without, like in a regular bank, somebody earns money from the operation of the bank simply by owning a share in the bank. That doesn't happen in a credit union. And similarly, there are several grocery stores that are organized as cooperatives. There are basically two kinds of grocery cooperatives. One is run by members. Only members can shop there, and some members volunteer to work there, and they get discounts on their groceries in return. The other kind of grocery cooperatives is just like any other grocery store, except it's again owned by its members, and anybody can shop there, but only members get to vote for the leadership of the cooperative, and only members participate if the grocery store makes a profit. Grocery stores typically don't make a lot of profit either way, but if it does, the members will receive a portion of that profit according to how much they bought from the store. This is called patronage. It's a way of distributing profits in accordance with how much business you did with the cooperative. And you see the same thing happening in producer cooperatives. Producer cooperatives are very common in the agricultural scene. If farmers were to simply bring their products to the local farmers market, they would not be able to go very far, and you would not be able to buy butter and milk and eggs in your local grocery store either, because you would have to go to the farmer's market to buy it directly from the farmer. So what the farmers did is they formed a company that would process all these farm products like milk, turning it into cheese and butter and whatever. And the same thing with meat. They would take the pigs and the cows and turn them into bacon and beef, and distribute it to all the stores where you now go and buy these products. And this company where the farmers have formed a company that they own, so there's nobody making a profit from that piece of the business, except the farmer themselves. So in other words, for making milk and making butter, farmers get a piece of that profit as well. And then we come to the third kind of worker cooperatives, worker cooperatives. And here we apply the same principle that you are members of a company that maybe produces, I don't know, some sort of manufacturing or whatever. It could be a service company as well, maybe a landscaping company or an engineering company. But typically in an ordinary company, it would be one person who starts a business and then hires other people to do the work. In a worker cooperative, it's different. In a worker cooperative, everybody is an owner. They would purchase one share, and then it's not really a share. That's why it's called a buy-in, not a share. A share in a company like a bank would have two features. It will have a voting right, and it would have a right to the profit. In a worker cooperative, the profit is not distributed according to how many shares you own. It's distributed according to how many hours you work in the cooperative. So that's the big difference. And each member can only have one share, so you cannot have 100 shares and decide 100 times as much as the other workers there. Everybody has one share. It's called a buy-in because it's not exactly a share. It looks like a share a lot because it has voting rights, but it doesn't have the same kind of rights to profits as ordinary shares do. All of these cooperatives are democratically governed. That means that everybody who has a share has one vote. So, and you cannot have any more than one share. So, in other words, it's one person, one vote. Let's say you were a small company with 5 individuals, 5 owners. You are small enough to be able to make decisions where everybody chimes in. But if you're 20 or 25 people, that becomes more difficult, actually impractical. So what you would do then is to have some sort of representative democracy where you would elect a board of directors for the company who would make decisions on behalf of all the members. Lots of people are members of some sort of association where the that are governed democratically, just like that. And actually, the country is democratically governed because you get to vote every few years for your leaders. Yep. So that's where that's the an overview of the different kinds of cooperatives that are in the United States. Actually, so there are more than 2 million people work in cooperatives in the United States, but only about 7,000 work in actually worker cooperatives. The rest are employees in various credit unions, dairies, grocery stores, and the cooperative economy as a whole. I believe the number is somewhere in around $400 or $500 billion, but I couldn't be sure about that. It's a significant amount of money, that's for sure, but it's still a small portion of the entire economy. And worker cooperatives, which is what we are mostly interested in here, again, is a very small portion of the U.S. economy. But as we saw with the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain have grown tremendously. There are 74,000 members in the cooperatives in Mondragon, and also tens of thousands of workers are members of worker cooperatives in a region of Italy called Miglia. No, I don't even remember. Miglia Romano, I believe. So in here in the United States, it's a very small portion that are actually worker cooperatives. Yeah, there are approximately 400 or so in the United States, employing about, like I said, 7,000, about 7,000 people. There are a few very large ones. The largest one is about 2,000 members. It's in the Bronx. It's a home health care company, and I believe the second largest is a taxi company. But the vast majority are under 50, and the median is actually 10 members per worker cooperatives, and lots of them are just 2 people or 3 people. Worker cooperatives have a cousin called employee stock ownership plans. Employee stock ownership plans are pension plans. It's a feature, it's a benefit that employers can implement in their companies to motivate workers and to retain them so they don't leave. It's the difference between ESOPs and worker cooperatives is basically control. In a worker cooperative, all the members have direct control and they have direct ownership. In a company where the owner has decided to implement a stock ownership plan, the owner retains all the control. And the ownership that the employees have is not direct, it's through a trust. It's important that the laws that govern employee stock ownership plans require that a trustee be appointed to hold the shares on behalf of the employees, because we don't want the employer to have control over, to be able to use employee-owned stock shares for their own purposes. They belong to the employees, but they're held in trust for them. Yeah, so that was a little bit about worker cooperatives and cooperatives in general, and something about employee stock ownership plans. There are no questions in the chat box, so we will simply end the evening here, and we will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the first introduction of worker cooperatives. If you have a question, you can either call me or email me at the address on the screen. I will let it stay there for a little while. You can also place them in the comment section below. I would appreciate if you would either like the video or subscribe to my channel. Thank you.